does that look like?
Sono andati...
Yes.
Sono entrati, sì? No?
No.
Yeah, made it again.
We are not allowed to enter inside the mosques. Just in the platform.
Okay, let's all gather together because I don't want to get separated. So, see me over here. And you can see all the pieces of archaeology that they have laying out over here. It's from different time periods. Okay, we got everybody? Yes? Okay, good. So we're not allowed to go in Al-Aqsa Mosque or in the Rock. We can walk around out here and talk about this. The platform on top of Mount Moriah. Now, even up here, I got to be very careful with what I say and how loud I say it. So we are walking by on our right here, the entrance to Al-Aqsa Mosque. And then to our left, I want you to notice as we walk by the stairs that go up to the Dome of the Rock. Because now that platform that is up there that's serving as a secondary foundation to the Dome of the Rock was built for the Dome of the Rock. It doesn't have to do with the Israelite temples that came before. Okay, but I want you to notice that there's a Temple Mount on top of the Temple Mount. You see what I mean? Because again, if you're going to build a building over the rocky peak of a hill, you're going to have to build a platform in order to put your building up there. So that's what you're seeing is the platform on top of the platform or the Dome of the Rock for the purpose of the Dome of the Rock.
Faisal. Faisal.
What is it?
His name was Faisal.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was killed.
Yeah, but one
No,
of them,
they
he's
thought
on their side.
No, they thought
Now we will be out there. It's an amazing.
I think there'd be trees.
Okay, so I want you to look around, look at where I'm pointing. You see this green topped structure over here. You see there's one right here. You see there's one over there. There's one over there. So underneath our feet, what these are leading down to is a massive cistern. Okay, it's huge. And it's from the first temple. It's from the Solomon's temple. This is how they stored their water in the first temple. Tomorrow we're going to be looking at some of the water system of how they got water to the temple. We're going to be looking at the aqueduct system coming in from Hebron to Bethlehem, and then from Bethlehem, 2 aqueducts ran to Jerusalem. One went to Herod's temple, or Herod's palace up on the western hill, and the other one came to this cistern that's underneath your feet from the first temple period to fill it up. If you are dedicating, as Solomon did, the temple that he built up here, and you're sacrificing at the dedication 22 100,000 oxen, followed by 120,000 sheep and goats, you're going to need some water.
Amen.
And so water was a big deal both in both temple periods.
So this is predominantly just rainwater that is up here? Or
Well, they would have brought it in with slaves in Solomon's day, water carriers, and then aqueduct. And along the Roman aqueduct, of course, you had all these signs that basically said, if you touch this water, I'm going to kill you in horrible ways. So people tended not to touch the water.
So they must have had like a gully or gutter so the blood could run off, because that would smell after.
We don't really know.
After a while.
Certainly, the blood, they did have it set up for the blood to run off, but how exactly that worked, we don't have a description of it. Okay, so
follow me and we'll see if we can walk over to it. Sometimes they let us, sometimes they don't.
okay, now you'll notice that we're walking over different masonry, newer, more modern masonry. We are now over what is called Solomon's Stables, which has nothing to do with Solomon. But this is now the extension that we're walking over, that Herod the Great, remember the scene that's right over where I'm pointing? This is what he extended to the south, the Temple Mount. Okay, and under our feet right now is a mosque. You see, it looks like we're walking across the roof of Walmart or something like that. You see these different structures. So there's a big mosque underneath us, and all it had was and there's big arches in it that Herod the Great built to extend the Temple Mount. They only have the ancient entry and exit for that mosque, and so Israel kind of turned their head at one point. They dug a big hole over here. We'll go look at it, so that they could make a modern entry exit. Yes, Mount of Olives in front of us. We were standing up where you see the buses there, looking this way yesterday.
Is this the area that the Muslims excavated years and years ago? I remember seeing pictures.
Yes, right here. Now we're approaching the southeast corner of the Temple Mount, which is the highest point. So if you're going to throw somebody off of the Temple Mount and you want them to fall the furthest, you throw them off this end. And this is the tradition that we have for James being thrown off of this corner of the Temple Mount. And this is also where a lot of people say that Jesus and Satan stayed, because they're thinking physically. They're thinking that they're there standing physically, and so, but the pinnacle of the temple would be at the top of where the Holy of Holies is. Because they just zapped from the Judean wilderness to there.
You can look through these arrow slots here and see how high of Jesus, who became the leader of the Jerusalem church.
So the
Brother of Jesus.
son of Joseph.
Not that, yeah.
So Joe, I assume they offer him to reject Jesus and become a heretic and he refused? And that's when he was thrown out?
Yeah. He was thrown off as a persecution against the early Jewish church that was here. This was part of what eventually would lead up to the destruction of Jerusalem. In fact, we have the historical records in Eusebius that gives us the names of all the leaders of the church here in Jerusalem from the time of Jesus to the time just following. then that's when the names changed from Jewish names to Gentile names. So there were Jewish leaders of the church here all the way up until the time of Hadrian, even past 70 AD destruction. Okay, so again, this is the hole that was dug by the Muslims. Israel, again, I don't know that they gave them permission, but they certainly did turn their heads while they did it. And so they dug, look at how much soil is dug out.
They got the permission by Ehud Barak, who was the prime minister at that time.
Yeah. And then they took the dirt that came from this big giant hole here and they dumped it out into the Kidron Valley there.
Really?
Yes. And so then a friend of mine named Gabi Barkai, if you watch any of my videos, you'll see him interviewed a lot.
Sifting project.
So that it's what's called the sifting project. They've been going through that pile of soil that came out from here and sifting through it. They found all kinds of things from small inscriptions to Babylonian arrowheads to all kinds of things, but they don't come from any context. The only way that they're known for what they date to is by paralleling them from other sites that were dug layer by layer, because here they're just one big heap laying down in the Kidron Valley. But it does give us some archaeology and some evidence that comes from the Temple Mount itself. Now look at where the temple would have stood over here and where this hole was dug. It probably would have been richer with finds if it would have come from a hole closer to the temple, but it's pretty rich with finds as is.
Taking pictures of everybody. We all look so lovely.
Yeah. So we can cut through here.
Those are modern. Because I when I left the look. Yeah.
We're just walking through.
Yeah.
And as we're walking here, notice the Mount of Olives to our right, which, as we covered a few days ago, is where Jesus will return to, which will split in half. And then the river will flow from where we are now out through the canyon that forms when the Mount of Olives splits in half. So you want to get that. Wow, that sky looks a little mean. Behind the dome of the rock. It's gonna be one heck of a river though too.
All these columns are from which temple? Which temple? 691 by Abdulmalik ibn Marwan.
Yeah. Some of them are probably from there. Yeah. When the Crusaders came up here, they converted these buildings, these Islamic buildings, into churches for the brief time that they had control of the Temple Mount. Templars.
But they didn't read the Bible, John.
They what?
They didn't read the Bible because didn't the Bible already say that anything that was up here would be destroyed?
Well, I mean, that's the reason that the Christians didn't build churches up here in the Byzantine period, It doesn't mean that they couldn't have built churches, because Jesus wasn't talking about churches that were coming. But okay, let's just hold up here and let people catch up, and I want to talk about something here.
Michelle, do they have any estimates on how like these olive trees are here? Do you ever hear anything like that? I mean, they look so old. I don't know. It's hard to say. Yeah, they're hard to say.
I don't know if they tested already or not the age of these olive trees.
They don't know.
Yeah.
Even when they test it, even when they say they know, they don't know.
Yeah.
Kind to. Okay, I want to talk about this. Remember, we were 2 days ago. We were down in the city of David, in David's palace, and remember that it was in David's heart to build a dwelling place, a house for Yahweh. Okay, Michelle is walking around looking at, making sure security isn't coming. And then God told David, hey, what I'm going to do is I'm going to build you a house through your offspring, your dynasty that's going to last forever. Okay? One of the visuals that the Bible gives us, metaphors that the Bible gives us for the house of David that God built for David, is the olive tree. Okay? Why? Because the olive tree is symbolic of a resurrection. And so if you look at this olive tree right here, which I think is kind of cool because it's right in front of where the temple stood. So we're talking about the two houses. The olive tree represents the house that God built for David. And you can see that with an olive tree, when they die, you can cut them down to a stump. And that's what happens to the house of David. The house of David, through his offspring, the dynasty is going and going until the Babylonian destruction. And at the Babylonian destruction, we have Jehoiachin, who is taken off as a prisoner to, he surrenders, and he's taken as prisoner to Babylon. Okay, then we're reading along, and we're reading the house of David, and then we see Zedekiah get captured. We see his sons, right, being put to death in front of him, and then his eyes put out and led off to Babylon. And Jerusalem and the temple are destroyed. That's when the tree looks dead, and they cut it down to a stump. Right? But then remember that 2 Kings, the book of Kings, and the book of Chronicles does not end with the death of Zedekiah's sons. It ends with Jehoiachin, who is the rightful king still of Jerusalem from the house of David, being released from prison. And in fact, in the excavations at Babylon, they found what are called the ration tablets, which mention Jehoiachin and his sons. The house of David is still alive. And that's what happens to an olive tree. When it's cut down to a stump, the moisture from rain gets down and touches those roots way down there, and then all of a sudden a shoot comes from the stump of Jesse. As you see right there, you see the live shoot that comes out of the top of that dead stump. And so that's how the house of David gets to the branch, which is one of the titles for the Messiah, who is the son of David. Okay? So that you could build a building over the peak of Mount Moriah. And the platform that you're standing on is purely Islamic. It was built for this building. So what the platform looked like for the first and second temple would have been totally different. So this is at the Holy of Holies. I don't know, have any of you heard of Lane Rittmeyer? He's done a lot of work on the temple and everything. Anyways, I recommend his work. It's very good. And so you can look out here to the east, which is where the temple faced. Now, when I say that the temple faced that, it means that when you're entering the temple as a priest, your back is to the east. Okay, but you can see how far out the edge of the Temple Mount is, and that platform would have been laid out with a lot more space to the east, because you gotta have room for your your court of the Gentiles, and then your court of the the women, and then the court of the Israelites, and then you got to have the altar, which would have been somewhere in this area right here, and then of course the Holy of Holies, and then the holy place, and then the Holy of Holies furthest to the west. Okay, so you got to use your imagination, because it doesn't look anything like that today, and we can't see any remnant from that. Now, I want us all to walk over all of these.
We wouldn't have been allowed to get this close to it.
Okay, come right about in here. This is a good perspective. So come at least where I am, that you can see the two domes for the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Okay, can everybody see that? So the dome that's closest to us with a cross on the top, what do you think that's? That's Calvary, where Jesus was crucified, and behind it is the tomb where he was buried and rose from the dead. So I want you to get that perspective now. Right about here somewhere, where we were just standing, is where that altar of sacrifice was, and that's where Abraham went to sacrifice Isaac and was given a substitute, and that's where Jesus did not get a substitute. He became the substitute as the Son of God and the Lamb of God, and he died for the sins of the world right there. And I want you to take, the church away and everything like that. He dies on top of a hill where certainly he was looking right at the temple. And remember, the centurion is standing at the foot of the cross, right there, that close. And then right where the Dome of the Rock is the Holy of Holies. So that curtain in between the holy place and the Holy of Holies is right here where the Dome of the Rock starts. And so imagine that moment of atonement, perfect atonement, perfect forgiveness of sins, when he breathed his last, and the temple, the curtain in the temple ripped in two, and the centurion said, "Surely this was the Son of God." And from that moment on, the forgiveness of sins has been available to all those who would believe.
Why were you pointing that way?
Because the altar, this is the Holy of Holies, so the holy place would have come back, and the altar would have been, the altar of sacrifice would have been in front of it.
It wouldn't have been the rock?
No, that's where the Holy of Holies is.
But that's not the sacrifice Abraham sacrificed.
We don't know exactly, but we know that the altar for the first and second temple would have been back from that. They actually, if you look at Lane Rittmeyer's stuff, they actually have some wall lines preserved from that period on the rock, which shows, and then we have historical sources that talk about that rock as far as the Holy of Holies. And of course, the Holy of Holies is going to be back on the west side of the tomb. If you put the altar on the rock, in other words, you don't have room for a temple behind it to the west.
So the picture of the rock that's in your book,
Yes.
the Muslims do that picture, or how
It's from the late 1800s,
Oh, okay.
where the, yeah.
So Joel, I read things.
Sounds more
Now, I can tell you with people that think that it's up on the western hill. Where is the temple? We just went through all those scriptures. Scripture, which is our authority, says that it's all in the same place. That Solomon built the temples in the same places that the altars were, that they rebuilt the second temple in the ruins of the first temple, and that Herod expanded it. Nobody moved anything anywhere. This is where it is, okay? Now there's reasons for the Temple Institute to want the temple to have been over there, because, then there's the possibility of building a Jewish temple there next to the mosque, or not mosque, but shrine. You know that wooden ramp that you walked up? They can't even put a permanent entrance to the Temple Mount, because every time they go to do it, then the riots break out. It doesn't make it more plausible to build a Jewish temple next to a Muslim mosque when you can't even bring your Bible up here. So that's why I used a picture from the 1800s. Oh yeah. Maybe we'll go there after the
On the top of that? Is that riding? Don't go inside. Right along the edges. And that's
No, it's inside.
Oh, okay.
Inside. So yeah, the question was where is this dedicatory inscription in the Dome of the Rock? It's inside. It's on the inside of the dome, inside the building.
Who built these arches? Is that also
This is all Islamic stuff that you're seeing here. Okay, so this is where the Temple Institute says that the temple stood. But if you, again, look at an aerial view of the Temple Mount, then you see that it was built for a building that would have stood there, not all the way over here. Why would you build this big platform and then put your temple way over on one side? Not only that, but we saw the historical source from 1300 years ago where Omar comes into the city and says, hey, I want to build a sanctuary. What does he say? Show me the spot where the Israelite temple stood. And he was shown the rock, it says. What is the rock? That's not the rock. The rock is the one that's built over, which is why it's called the Dome of the Rock. Okay? And most of the places that we will go are marked by a church. It's very unusual that this isn't marked by a church. Why is that? Well, we have it in the historical source. They didn't feel comfortable building a church up here because of Jesus' prophecy that not one stone would be left on top of another, it all would be cast down, as far as talking about the temple. Okay? So, no, the temple didn't stand here, it stood there. That's what all the historical sources say. That's what the logic says. That's how this whole platform is laid out. How do we know of all the hills? We talked about this the other day. How do we know from all the hills in Jerusalem which one the temple stood on? Which one all those scriptures that we just read about are talking about? How about the hill whose rocky peak has been marked by that building for 1300 years, and that has an ancient platform, stone platform built around it, you know, that dates all the way back before, parts of it to Herod and parts of it before Herod, because Herod expanded the Temple Mount this way, but not this way. So we have masonry on that side that dates back to pre-Herodian masonry. It's obvious. God's not trying to trick us, and people don't forget. So where these places are is obvious. But it's not obvious, and I understand that if somebody comes and says, oh, the temple was over the city of David, and they go to a church in America and they teach that, then the people in the church don't have any concept of what you're looking at and what you're walking over, and so they don't know any better. So they tend to believe the speaker and whatnot, which is why that's teaching authoritatively. We want to understand it with our minds, why we know what we know. Which was done by a guy named Benjamin Mazar, who is the grandfather of the Elat Mazar we've been talking about. So when Benjamin Mazar was digging around the Temple Mount itself, his architecture was Lane Rittmeyer, and so Lane Rittmeyer, I mentioned him over there too. He wrote a book. Gosh, why? It's just, you know, those things where you can't. It's not. It's close, but it's not. Do you remember the name of his book? I'll remember it here along the way. And but anyways, I know Lane has continued digging here and in Jordan as well, and he serves as architect. So he points out he really is the expert on the temple, and I do highly recommend his material. And so he points out this wall line right here. Now remember, when you're looking at walls or masonry, you see them from different periods. Do you see how different these stones are, right on this line right here than the other ones?
Yeah.
These are very old. And so he has identified this as a wall line from Solomon's temple. Okay, not the edge of the Temple Mount itself, but the edge of what the platform would have been for the temple, just like we have this platform for the Dome of the Rock. Anyways, it's interesting. So I want you to go in your minds now back to where we were standing on the southeast corner, where we were the highest preserved point of the Temple Mount platform. You look through the air slot way the heck down there. That's the highest point. Now we're on the opposite corner. Okay, so now we're on the northwest corner. See what I'm talking about? We were over here and now we're over here. Okay? This is the opposite. This is the corner that to build the box around Mount Moriah, look where the peak is. To build this big giant stone box around Mount Moriah, they had to cut into the bedrock here. You see the bedrock that they cut into? Look at the bedrock over in here. They cut into. Okay? So on this corner, they actually had to cut into the bedrock to put the box in. On that corner, that's the highest point. Which do you think then, for example, when the Romans come in 70 AD or the Babylonians in 586, which is going to be your vulnerable part to protect your temple from being burned down? Right here. Which is why, at the time of Herod the Great in the Roman period, the Antonia Fortress stood here. To guard this weak spot. And we'll see a model of Jerusalem today at the Israel Museum, and we'll see the Antonia Fortress over there, which is pretty exaggerated in that model. But anyways, there's a reason for it. It wasn't just to have a building there. It wasn't a palace. You're going to put a palace right there on that weakest corner? And no, I don't know what king would be dumb enough to do that. You're going to put a fortress on that corner to guard that weak link, because you don't want your temple to get destroyed. Everybody understand? Okay, and so we have biblical accounts that happen, like for example, a lot of when we're reading about Paul, and the riots are starting up here, and then he's taken into the barracks when he's taken into the Antonia Fortress, which was there also to guard the, during feasts and whatnot on the Temple Mount to keep the peace. And so,
Was that an entrance to Antonia Fortress?
no, it's all Islamic now. There's nothing left of Antonia Fortress, but we have the eyewitness descriptions of it in Josephus, and we do have parts of it that have been found in excavations over on the other side, as well as from the time of Hadrian. Okay, so it's a good thing to understand when you're reading your Bible and you're reading about Paul and commotion up on the Temple Mount, and the guards coming out and taking him in and questioning him and all this kind of stuff, and then you're talking about the Antonia Fortress. When you're talking about the trial of Jesus, where the Bible says that took place at the palace, That's not talking about that. It's not talking about the fortress. It's talking about Herod the Great's palace that we're going to talk about later. Okay? And there were other palaces, but as we're going to see in the model and everything, if Josephus is talking about other palace, then he signifies it by saying the Hasmonean palace.
So they stopped her because of the veil. A lot of ask me that, a lot of ladies without.
Yeah. But when Josephus or the Gospels say the praetorium or the palace, it's talking about palace that was built by Herod the Great. Okay? Basically, everything that you're seeing and what you're walking on is Islamic. And these little buildings that you see along the way are Muslim graves of important leaders. Even they want to get Arafat buried up here. Just Muslims are allowed in.
Did you say Islam? Muslim?
Yeah, Muslims. And it's important also to distinguish that the Dome of the Rock is not a mosque. It's an Islamic shrine. Al-Aqsa is the mosque. So Michelle was telling me because he's got a Christian name, he's not allowed up on the Temple Mount. And the Muslims call this Haram al-Sharif. Haram al-Sharif. Sanctuary of the Holy, is that?
Yeah, exactly.
And the Muslims call Jerusalem Al-Quds, which means the Holy. And we'll have to go back through security.
Now on the western wall, men must cover the head.
Yeah.
And women don't?
No, no. It's just the opposite. Yeah. But we have the kippah over there. We can put the kippah.
Okay, so where you see Kathy?
Cassie, I think she's on the steps over there.
If this is where you want to go out? No. No, next one?
The last one.
Okay. You haven't been up here?
No, we didn't in 2015. That was the rock throwing incident on the
Yeah. Even before a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
It was terrible.
Yeah, and there was protests in the streets. And
Yeah.
we just went to the wall, but not.
For a couple of weeks also.